binlerce yıllık insanlık tarihinde hep öğretmenler, yol göstericiler, usta öğreticiler oldu. Peki 21. yüzyılda öğretmenlik mesleği değişecek mi? Pandemi bize neler gösterdi? Öğretmenlerin pandemi döneminde en büyük sıkıntıları neler? Bunları nasıl aşabiliriz? Bugün Vikas'a bunları soracağız. Vikas dünyanın dört bir yanından eğitimcilerle sürekli temas halinde ve bize biraz dünyadan, öğretmenlerden haberler paylaşacak. It's a great pleasure to invite Vikas on stage. Hi, welcome Vikas.
Hi, Devrim. How are you? I think I should say merhaba. Is that right?
Yep. Thank you so much. Well said. Vikas, thank you very much for saving your precious time, but your participation is greatly appreciated. I'd like to start right away with you and your passion for creating a global dialogue in the field of education and teachers in particular. I know you have other interests and you try to, call people to action in other areas as well. But I think you've recently been focused on teachers and education. So please tell us about yourself, what you do, what are you planning to do?
You're very kind to invite me, and it's a pleasure to be here. Many congratulations to you, your team, your organization for organizing this conference. I think it's really important to be able to help teachers and educators and schools, navigate their way through this pandemic. And I think the way that that you have decided to do it, and what I firmly believe in, is in building community as a way of resolving and understanding what we are facing. And so my background is, over the last 10, 15 years has been focused around the cause of teachers, because we know that, well, ourselves, we've all been to school, and we know that there's a lot of research that actually says that no education system cannot outperform the quality of its teachers. And that being said, then the best investments that we can make are in making sure that we get the best and the brightest to become teachers, and that they stay in the teaching profession for as long as they can. And so it is up to us all who are not teachers to actually think about how do we create those conditions. And so the thing I know from my experience is that there are lots of education conversations that happen around the world. You'll have policymakers speak often about education. They will dream about the future of education. They will talk about all these big subjects. And if you really look at these conversations, how many times have they actually invited a teacher to actually come and speak to them, or be part of a panel, or consult them? Because and the likelihood is very slim, actually. And so what I found was, whenever I put a teacher on a platform, the entire conversation changed for the positive. It was richer, it was more enhanced, it was more nuanced, and you actually had someone who stands in a classroom teaching children actually weighing in on big topics like the future of education. And so whilst I want to sit here and say that I have the answers, my life and my career so far has been built around bringing teachers and bringing educators together as a way of promoting their experience and their expertise to be at the forefront of everything that we do in education.
Well, it's so true, because this has been my argument for a very long time, that teachers have not been allowed to raise their voice, nor did they have the power to really initiate and take the leadership in the area. So I think what you're trying to do is something that is really, really important, and I have great respect for that. And a good example of the fact you're trying to bring people together, create a global community, is the T4 event that you've organized recently. Can you tell us about the event in general and the impact of it?
Sure. I mean, so when I started T4, the pandemic was just taking hold, and what I was being drawn into were very many policy discussions with ministers of education and system leaders around the world. And we saw the enormous stress that systems all over the world were facing. And in these discussions, what was really interesting was these ministers obviously had the right intentions. They were caring and they were worried, but they didn't have many solutions. At the same time, on my social media feeds, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, what happened was I was seeing all these great teachers who I know leading from the front. They were showing courage, they were responding, they were innovating, they were trying to make sure that the kids in their schools continued learning, right? And so on suggestion, I said, look, why don't we bring some of these teachers into these policy discussions? And what seemed like a really good idea was actually problematic on many levels. And they kind of said no. And so I decided to go and actually get stimulus from teachers myself, because if they're the people who are leading from the forefront, we might as well understand as to, because no one else seems to know what's happening. We might as well go and understand what their perspectives are. And what happened was that I used to run a competition called the Global Teacher Prize, which is $1 million prize every year. And through that, I'd made friends around the world who were teachers, and some of them are Turkish. And when I brought them onto a Zoom call like this, what I came to realize was they were all asking the same question. And that's natural, right? Which is, what does the pandemic mean for them as teachers, right? What will happen after the pandemic finishes or school closures and that phase was over? And so in English, we call that trying to figure out what the new normal is. What will be the state of education after the pandemic? And I thought it was a really valuable discussion to have, which was to help them figure that out. And so we decided that we'd focus on 4 areas. The first was technology, obviously, because of everything we were seeing. The second was on collaboration. The third was on leadership. And the fourth was on well-being. And when we look at these 4 areas and how they related teachers, that's how we got our name, T4. And so within a span of a month, Devram, what really happened was, we put our hands out and say, hey, we're doing this. Who wants to help? Who wants to participate? And we had this most amazing response from around the world. 103,000 teachers participated in this online conference to help them figure this question out as to what the new normal means for them. And that actually gave me a lot of inspiration and encouragement to think about, okay, what is it that I've learned? After that, Devram, I went on and set up another event, because people said you should organize another event where, if I was frustrated with system leaders, whenever I traveled around the world, I would always go to a good school, or I'd always meet a great teacher. And I'd ask myself, how comes I've never heard of this school? And you think, wow, if they're so great, I am someone in the world and I should have heard about them. I run this big prize. And how comes my intelligence or the data that I have doesn't show me that they exist? So what Zoom has done is allowed us to bring a school that is excellent from anywhere in the world together with another school to say, okay, this is how we have developed expertise, right? And this is how we've been successful. And as soon as I did a few of those kinds of matchups, I decided that actually, this is a really powerful thing to do. And so I decided that we would choose 100 schools from around the world and ask them to showcase how they've developed their expertise. And we did that during a week in October, and we called it World Education Week, which again is taking place in October this year. And I hope some Turkish schools will apply for it. In fact, the deadline for application for your schools is tomorrow. And so we've been running this open process on our website, which is t4.education. And if you have an expertise, please go to our website, have a look at what areas we're looking for, and come and share it. So what happened was that World Education Week was this pursuit of making sure that we can share school expertise. And the byproduct was, again, we had a huge turnout. Lots of people attended these 100 events. 40,000 people attended these 100 events. And so when I stand back and I say, what is it that I've learned about what has happened during the pandemic? I think there are 3 things. One is, it is now absolutely possible to reach teachers and schools directly at scale around the world. In North America and Western Europe, it was possible because of technology. But when we look at the participation of teachers and schools from around the world, they come from all these wonderful places where previously what we've said is there are no devices, there is a lack of connectivity, but even then we see people from these places join. And so that's one thing that we've learned, that you can now reach teachers and schools directly. The second thing is that COVID and the pandemic has brought everyone to their knees around the world at the same time. And so I think there's a greater acceptance and receptivity to learning from other contexts. So, normally as a teacher, you're so immersed in your classroom or so immersed in your school, you don't necessarily look up and see what everyone else is doing. And because we were all at a loss in terms of what to do, we were open to saying, oh, okay, from here, I can learn this, from there, I can learn this, and I can implement it in my classroom. And this receptivity, for the first time, I saw that it wasn't just from, the rich countries to the middle and low income countries, but also the other way, right? And I thought that was really powerful, something of the time. And the third thing was, the third learning, which I kind of have known for a long time, is that what really works when it comes to education and building community and those kinds of things is that, teachers trust teachers and schools trust schools. And so every time a teacher spoke or a school presented itself, it would have much greater resonance and authenticity, and people were interested. And so that's what we call peer-to-peer learning. And we know that peer-to-peer learning is the game changer. So these three aspects have gone on to inform how T4 is structured. And we've been doing these virtual events as a way of convening and building global community. But what really comes out of them are what I call public goods that help to strengthen school ecosystems.
Wow, I think your intention has been great and the outcome sounds perfect. So of all the opportunities you've created to hear from educators, you mentioned it a little bit, but maybe we can go more about it. What seems to be the biggest problem for teachers?
So again, what we're doing currently, for example, is we're doing a survey, a global survey on the use of tech by teachers, technology by teachers. If you look at society as a whole, I forgive me, I'm not familiar with Turkey, but you will see the advancement of various parts of our society because of the use of technology. Right? Whether it's in banking, whether it's in grocery shopping, whether it's in getting a cab, all of these aspects have taken over our lives and become more technological. And so they call this the fourth industrial revolution. And what's happened is that education really over the last 200 years hasn't really changed that much. So they call it, we're still affixed to something that is in the first industrial revolution, where steam engines were were the big thing. And so the question always has been, well, how is it that education can also realize the benefits of technology, right? And I think that this is such a big topic now, and the pandemic has kind of thrust it upon the education community as to the importance of technology. And even those that were reluctant to use it now understand, actually, this is just way of life. Then I think what we need to be doing more of is understanding how we incorporate technology into our teaching, right? I'm not saying that robots will replace teachers, because I think that will never happen. But certainly there are certain parts of our jobs as teachers that actually can be done more efficiently, more effectively, more objectively. And so we should think about how that happens. So like you said, 3 weeks ago, we hosted a big event called the Teacher Tech Summit, which was exactly that. We found teachers from around the world who are really good at incorporating technology in their teaching. So for example, how do you assess children in online environments, right? How do you build an engaged school community using online tools? How do you create good digital content? These are all skills that I think teachers will have to come to master. And so I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have today. And I would encourage all of our teachers to think about and say, okay, what parts of my role as a teacher can I incorporate technology through? Because I think that will be quite powerful.
So what do you think the post-pandemic education will look like? We know that robots are never gonna, not never, but not likely to replace teachers, not in the near future. And I totally agree with all that you've said about the future of education and teachers' problems at the moment and the skills that needs to be developed immediately. And what do you think? I mean, I think the schools are open in England, right?
Yes.
How is it going?
And so, I mean, it's a really great question. Like, in a different way, you're asking me the same question that a lot of people ask, which is, what is the future of education, right? And as much as people actually really, dream and say, the future of education is through an app, right? That's all you need, and kids will be at home, and blah 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 blah. The reality is that that's not going to happen. And so what I see happening is, all this financial stimulus that's been put into our economies because of the pandemic, is going to result in, a change of priorities when it comes to government spending. And so for a long time, governments have thought about efficiency as the key primary measure. Are things efficient? And what the pandemic has shown is that, in fact, when you look at efficiency as your sole priority when it comes to public sector expenditure, you put at risk things that have now been thrown up because of the pandemic. And so I think what's going to happen is that from this notion of efficiency, we're going to move to a higher value of being resilient. And that is what public systems are, I think, pivoting to. Now, and that's not just in education, but it's across every single public sphere. We want our systems to be more resilient, whether it's health systems, whether it's the world of work, or whatever it is. But in education, when you think about what does resilience really mean, right? And it really comes down to, I think, a very simple idea, which is we need to strengthen our public schools, our public education. And so we are going to see this focus shifting to resilience. And I think that the future of education is in strengthening of schools. And I know it sounds very simplistic, but the reality is that, if you look at any kind of data that exists, international benchmarks, if you look at PISA, which is the OECD's measure and benchmarking tool, you would say that, well, if we really cared about education, wouldn't we all be doing it better, right? Would we be languishing in the middle or the bottom of the table? It's easy to say we care about education, but actually it's much harder to work at it. And I think it takes a lot more effort. So when someone says to me, what is the future of education? I say the future of education is in strong schools, resilient schools.
Couldn't agree more. We have a question, Vikas, in the question and answer section. It's actually a question by Ilkay. She says, or he says, because it's a unisex name, the majority of students or kids in Turkey do not have access to schooling from distance, in distance education. And the gap is widening up.
Yeah.
And what kind of policy recommendations do they have for the governments?
Yeah, so look, there are a lot of lessons being learned as we go on, like, in terms of how we do this. In the UK, for example, the government has put in place a massive tutoring program and a lot of money behind this, and a catch-up program. And the other thing that they've done actually at not a ministerial level, but at the very senior level, is put in place an education recovery czar, like, whose job is to actually help the government think through how children catch up. And so I think these are some strategies, but I don't think there are any resolutions to this, right? And so it has to come from a willingness. Education is run by government. Let's just be honest about it. If the government doesn't care about education, well, you can't really do much at a mass system and scale. That's what I mean. As educators and teachers, of course, you will be interested in doing more, and you will do as much as more, and you have been doing a great job. But actually, we need better system leadership in this space.
Well, we're really hoping for that because as the entire globe, I think. So there is no other time. This is a bit long, but I think we're approaching to the final end bit. There is no other time in history that teachers have been needed more. Equitable and quality education and the gap have been mentioned more, and stronger relationships between parents and teachers and the community have been understood more. And do you have anything else to add to that list? And what are the next steps?
So we shouldn't become complacent, actually. What I mean by that is these small gains that have been made, I think are really significant, right? But for us to assume that we won't go back to the old way, I think would be a little bit foolhardy. And there are many examples in history where pandemics have come. And actually, in that moment, of course, they've been dealt with. But after you've dealt with them, you go back to exactly where you were. If I look at Ebola as an example in West Africa, did education really improve? I'm not sure, right? And so we really have to make sure that the changes that have come, which are the positive, the silver lining from the pandemic, we do more to make sure that these gains that we've made actually stay, and all the adverse impacts of the pandemic we absolutely ditch and get rid of, right? So the question, I think, is around, if you repeat it, please, Devrim, because I don't want to misquote anything.
Yeah, it's like, do you have anything else to add to this list, and what are the next steps?
Give me the list again.
The list is the teachers needed and the community understands it more clearly. Yeah. Equitable and quality education have been discussed more because of the gap, and powering up public schools, making it more resilient, and the relationship between parents, teachers, and the entire community. So these have been really couldn't have been understood more. So is there anything else that you want to add to that?
I think the only solution actually in this situation is to make sure, like I inferred earlier, I think we have to make teaching more attractive as a profession. The world over, there's a recruitment and retention crisis. Anyone who, it's really difficult to recruit teachers. I don't know what this exact situation in Turkey is, but we have a massive shortage. The UN set something called the Sustainable Development Goals, which are like a 15-year target, and the current set expire in 2030. In order to achieve Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is on quality education, I'm going to ask you to take a guess, and maybe in the chat function or in the Q&A function, those that are watching can actually tell me, how many teachers do you think we need between now and 2030 to achieve a quality education for all? Put a number. Let's see what people say.
While awaiting for the numbers, I can say that teachers, we have a great many teachers who have not been appointed yet. Like they are on the list and waiting.
Yeah.
So that's one issue. And another issue is the quality of training that they receive at the college. And that's another area of concern for the education system.
100%. And so one part of it is, of course, we want to recruit teachers. And yes, there are so many nonsensical policies that governments put in place, like, you train teachers and then you don't employ them. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It doesn't sound efficient. Then on the other side, when it comes to actually what you said, teacher professional development, how can you not invest in the, if we know that the biggest difference in an education system is the teacher, why wouldn't you invest more and more and more into them to make sure they're more and more effective? And many governments just don't, right? They think that once you pass your initial teacher training, that's kind of enough. And I think they couldn't be more wrong. And so that's the second thing. But this is where I think Peer-to-peer learning networks are important. This is where I think tech helps, where things like T4 have come about, and you can actually build global community, build networks, and you can all learn together, or you can share ideas together. And I think these are really powerful things. So I see a number of different responses come into the chat, in the Q&A function.
It says for the world 2 billion, for Turkey 5 million at least. There is one guess.
Okay, give me some others.
69 million teachers are needed, if I remember correctly, she says. Hajar says.
So what do you think the answer is, Deborah?
Well, I think it's millions, not billions, but millions. But I can't really make a correct guess. So what is your guess?
Well, the person that said 69 million new teachers are required is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
We need just imagine, we need 69 million new teachers. Do you know how many that is? And so this is not Turkey-centered, it's actually the world over.
Yes.
And so the question is, how do you make teaching a more attractive profession? And I think the pandemic has kind of allowed for people to understand that how demanding a job it is, how, how rigorous it is, how much energy you require, what skill sets you require. And I think what we have to do is look at, just look at this period that we've gone through and take some of that and say, okay, how do we now convince those that would consider going to medicine or accountancy or engineering, and saying, okay, how do we convince them that to come into teaching instead? And I think one of the big things that we do is make sure that people understand it's a very intellectually demanding and satisfying profession. And that being the case, then I think people would consider it as a really attractive profession.
And it should come from the inside as well. Like the teachers themselves should understand that it's intellectually very valuable and satisfying profession itself. That, the value of teaching, of course, this is actually a culture and a viewpoint as well. But I think for our young teachers especially, my recommendation would be really to value what they're doing and not really compare it to the salary or any other tokens, but what we're doing. Of course,
I think, Deborah, that's a really tough thing to actually do, which is, on one hand, like, I think teachers are constructed in a way that you understand that the purpose behind this. But I do think that teachers should be paid more. I do think teachers should have rights. I think teachers should be, it's a very valuable profession. Why shouldn't teachers receive all those things? And why should they just run on the aspect of this is societal cause that I'm strengthening? Teachers should enjoy the benefits of that come in other professions. And I think we should be fighting for those.
Exactly. And this is actually why we are here discussing their problems, because it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I think for me, it was a very fruitful discussion. I enjoyed listening to your experience and your insights about teaching profession and education system on the whole. So I'm really hoping that we're going to collaborate in the near future. We're going to catch up and create projects together. All of our guests seem to have enjoyed your presence, and people have questions and comments, similar comments as you made. So for now, we have to say bye. Enjoy the rest of your day, Vikas.
I would like to say thank you to all of you, and I'd love to continue this discussion. So please connect with me on LinkedIn, as an example. If you just search my name, I'll make sure that I accept all your friend requests. And there's a lot of activity that we do on social, so please join us. And I'm keen to learn from your experience as much as share what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Vikas. I'm sure there's going to be a big crowd from Turkey following you from now on. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take very good care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Şimdi bir videomuz var. Bilişim